Okay, so I am sitting here with Daniel Ryan, hypnotherapist, and I'm super excited to talk with you about meditation, hypnosis, past life regression, and other subjects that find themselves in the periphery of those. So I just want to open up with, let's get to know a little bit more about you. How did you find yourself in the profession of hypnotherapy?
Thank you, Tyler. Great to be here with you as well. Really, thank you very much.
Of course.
So hypnosis and past life regression are the family business. My father was a hypnotherapist and specialized in regression therapy and past life regression, and had a small town practice in the suburbs of New Jersey from the late 80s until 2011 when he passed away. And his life story is really infinitely more interesting than mine. I'm a fairly normal guy from the suburbs of New Jersey, but he was an orphan raised in Catholic orphanages outside Boston in the 1940s, Catholic orphanages, he was adopted by the Ryans when he was around 10 or 11 years old, the Ryans, whose last name I have, of course, and was taught hypnosis by the U.S. military in the late 1950s. And at the same time...
Like an MK Ultra type deal?
Very much so, very much so. And at the same time, my dad, whatever good fortune or luck he had, which wasn't much, put him in the parts of the military that had him more on the counseling end of it, because he was taught a very spooky kind of authoritarian hypnosis, very Manchurian Candidate stuff. You're getting very sleepy and things like that. And he was also stationed at Valley Forge Hospital in Pennsylvania for a short time, which introduced him to counseling and, really, I think, taught him and was his first experience with being any kind of I don't want to say healer, that's a kind of silly word, but in that context, really taught him how to see things from the other side and work with people a certain way. And again, it was all in this basis of hypnosis, psychology, persuasion, influence.
Now, how old is hypnosis as a study, as a practice?
Good question. It's difficult to track. So there are group experiences that we have evidence and research around going back to ancient civilizations in Greece and Egypt and China and other parts of the world. And then hypnosis as we know it today, we would have to map out its course with a bunch of different characters. Anton Mesmer, James Braid, some of these...
To be mesmerized,
Correct.
That word comes from Mesmer.
Absolutely. My timeline with hypnosis, and I'm speaking for the modern industrialized world when I say this, not the ancient world. I'm speaking for really the 19th century up until this point broadly. It really does begin with, if not Anton Mesmer himself, the world he lived in, followed by Jean Charcot, who was Freud's teacher, then Freud himself, who, in my opinion, stripped hypnosis for parts, Victorian hypnosis, mind you, that existed in a time with other things like female hysteria and all kinds of weird introductions in medicine. Things were still rather brutal. So Charcot to Freud, Freud to Jung, Jung to Milton Erickson in the 20th century in the United States, which is, he's a very kind of underappreciated figure in my opinion. He does something with psychology, therapy, narrative, the creative subconscious, hypnosis, trance. He kind of, biomedicine itself. He was also a physician and a doctor. So his fusion of all of these things in the 20th century, I think, is very important. And then my dad. But anyway, that's a kind of rambling answer to your question in a way, Tyler, of saying it's a very rich history is what it has. It's a fascinating and rich history that is also the history of our attention and trance states and communication in a way. It's such a rich subject.
Now, I feel like there's a bit of a disparity between the public perception of hypnosis and what hypnosis actually is. I feel like a lot of people see like maybe stage hypnosis and kind of like stage magic almost, and conflate that with what hypnosis actually is.
Quite naturally, too. I don't blame anybody for being skeptical. I also don't disparage anybody, their line of work. And I am as fascinated and into those amazing shows in mentalism and entertainment and hypnosis. You know, I have two buddies I'm thinking of in particular, Matthew Cooper and Vinny DePonto. They're acquaintances, guys I know who are doing incredible and entertaining work in these ways and working with trance and hypnosis. And they're awesome. They're so much fun. They're great. So, you know, I don't know who to point the finger at, and I don't think we need to blame anybody per se, but it's certainly not a consumer's fault for being confused. There's about 200 years of bad PR around the subject of hypnosis. If not bad, just strange and unfocused. And as you're saying, you know, mixed messages at best. But yeah, medical hypnosis has decades of solid research. The subject itself is fascinating. It does have this deep, rich history. When you have a relationship with a hypnotherapist that you can trust and you can work with and you can allow to guide you in the experience and use the tool in that way, it's an incredibly productive relationship. So it's a wonderful line of work. I could certainly say that. I'm very grateful and very fortunate to do this. It's such a weird job, but I love it. And I really credit being raised around it to the comfort that I have. But so there is that disparity. I completely agree, and I embrace it. It's honestly, I inherited it, and I'm not interested in getting like stressed out by it in any way. So I just step into it, and most people, I agree, you know, like people, it's not mind control. It's not these spooky kind of superstitious ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I learned from you from taking a few of your trance writing and also like past life regression and hypnosis sessions, where before I thought hypnotism was a hypnotist with the power to hypnotize you. And what I learned from you is that a hypnotist is just inducing the person into their own hypnosis. In a way, a chiropractor will say, I'm not healing you. I'm just helping your body heal itself.
Yeah.
A hypnotist isn't necessarily hypnotizing a person. They're leading the person into hypnotizing themselves. As you say, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. Yeah. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Of course. Yeah, and beautifully said there. And that's not necessarily what I say. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis, although I appreciate, I did say it, and I do, and I will again. But it's the core principle that I was taught by my friend and mentor, Melissa Tiers, if not my father long before that. But, you know, Melissa was the one that made it stick. But yeah, it's really just this kind of common sense understanding that the most powerful voice of influence is the voice inside of our heads. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So the most powerful hypnotist in the room at any given time is our self-talk. And to speak directly to the self-talk of suggestibility, imagine in a show or any other time where we are really before authority, be it, you know, a judge in a courtroom or a mystic that we completely have forfeited spiritual authority to in a certain way. You know, we will be open and suggestible, and perhaps asking ourselves, you know, well, I don't even know, you know, just this powerlessness ultimately. So looking at different contexts, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. The most powerful voice in our heads is our own. It connects to early life experiences, biases, the things that we don't know that we don't know. And I personally, it is an extension of my work to an extent, but I'm really quite empathetic to each of us for this because we really don't know what we don't know. So yes, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis.
Now, how would you compare hypnosis to meditation? How would you contrast and compare those two?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So this is one of my favorite subjects, having grown up around these practices. I have a metaphor that I work with. You've heard it before, that meditation is a glass of water, hypnosis is a swimming pool, and past life regression is an ocean.
Mm.
And that meditation, like a glass of water, like the one I have here, is simple, it's refreshing. If we allow it to be still, as we might ourselves in meditation, the contents of the glass also become still. The glass itself never empties. We can see through it. It takes on a kind of transparency, but it also distorts as we see through it. But it will become still. And then hypnosis is like a swimming pool, a larger container, a capacity to go deeper. We can stay towards the surface. We can go into the deep end. We can go into the past in hypnosis, into the future. Trance states have in them tides and currents and pacing and leading and all of these kinds of elements. And there's motion and movement in a trance, whereas in meditation, there can also very often be movement, but we might say
the goal is stillness.
One might say, yes, and appreciating there are different meditations. I have to disclaim this, of course, too, because as we know, there are no universal definitions really for these terms. I say that with terrific respect, and having learned, along the way and standing on the shoulders of giants and with gratitude to my teachers and the masters and such. So these subjects belong to no man or woman ultimately. If anything, I've constructed this metaphor as a tool and a way to talk to people about them because I saw a need for it as a kid. And as an adult, I guess I feel obligated to do something about it. So hypnosis is a swimming pool and past life regression is an ocean where it is infinite, it's mysterious, it's treacherous, it's beautiful. We don't know what's going to happen. It's unpredictable. It's wily. We go into it to kind of return to a source even, So meditation as a glass of water, hypnosis as a swimming pool, past life regression as an ocean. And all of these things, of course, are on a Venn diagram or a family tree, connected, cousins if not siblings. And the mechanics of each of them, I think it is, again, common sense to notice in ourselves that mechanically they're quite the same, that during every hypnotic trance in my office, there are moments of meditation. And during every meditation I've ever had, I think, there were moments of trance. So, the English language isn't even a great set of tools to talk about this kind of stuff. To zoom out to the importance of that and the linguistic problems to begin with. I'm very aware of that as a hypnotist. So yeah, these things are really wonderfully related in my opinion. And on a personal level, I can say from the experience of my personal practices with each of them, as well as being able to work with individuals and groups with them, one has supported the understanding of the other so much. My meditation is infinitely deeper now because I understand my trance states. I understand hypnosis in my body to an extent, not completely, of course, and in the world to an extent. And then the kind of larger concentric circles that past life regression will take us out to as well. Archetypal psychology, which we started talking about a few moments ago.
Yeah, that's something I want to get to too, because I think someone who gave us a fair amount of useful language to talk about these things is Carl Jung. And something that I believe actually you told me was he said that something like past life regression takes us to a place where every character is you and the landscape is symbolic. I believe I got that right.
It's a Jungian idea that is actually a lens for interpreting our dreams, that every landscape is symbolic and every character is the dreamer. So, in one's dream, every landscape is comprised of the associations and the feelings that you have in that scene. And there's a big difference, too, to keep in mind between a placid, calm, beautiful beach on a sunny day and a stormy, rocky, craggy shore. So again, the context, the landscape in the dream, and then every character is you.
Now, this is really awesome because it looks at past life regression as almost an induced narrative-based dream state. Is that something you would consider it?
I think that's a beautiful lens to interpret the experience through, and certainly one I embrace. It is absolutely, we're touching on mythical, archetypal, primal threads in our psychology. a book I constantly reference, especially in men's psychology, is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Mm-hmm.
And those archetypes, the way it's explored in that book. And for any men or women who are interested in archetypal psychology, I do deeply suggest checking out that book. It's a beautiful study of those 4 archetypes in the shadows and in the light, in an age where one might suggest there's not a lot of great male modeling
Mm-hmm.
in terms of good behavior at the absolute heights of power. You know, we're missing some. I would say we're missing some archetypal leadership. We're missing some modeling for what a benevolent masculine figure actually looks like at this time.
Yeah.
So anyway, this book is a real beautiful check-in to what healthy masculinity can be in a way. And that's just one reference, of course. And it is always this conversation between masculine and feminine. To speak to that side of it on a personal note, for me, the first past life regression I ever did as a 13-year-old boy, I went into a 20-something-year-old bride during expansion into the West in the U.S. in the 1800s sometime. I was left by my husband. I died doing dishes. And, you know, it took me the longest time to even ask myself, as a guy, what drew my psyche first in these experiences that I've now had the pleasure of having so many of, thousands, to, you know, a young woman recently married and, you know, powerless, to a man, an archetypal financier, you know, a kind of embodiment of greed in a way that would leave me high and dry. So yeah, it's a real beautiful study for pulling these things through in practice.
Yeah, so you would say that the characters that you encounter, they are mirrors to particular aspects of your life that you're struggling with. You know, maybe the bride that you see yourself incarnating as is an aspect of your personality, as is the financier who could be the oppressive tyrant that is motivating you towards doing things that might not often be in your best interest of your innocence and your benevolence, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. And as a boy, I can tell you at the time, it was very easy for me to project what had come through onto my relationship with my brother, a sibling rivalry that was very active in my house at that age. You know, like on one level, pretty normal stuff a kid will go through. And it was this narrative about powerlessness and force and where to exert it. And, you know, a lot of it actually very important lessons that kids need, in a sense. And, of course, I look at it so differently now as an adult. And it's still informing me, you know, 25, 27 years later. It's 27 to be exact. I just turned 40. And it's a wonderful thing to be. And yeah, so the amount of time is the message here that you know, they can stay with you and stay potent.
Yeah, almost like a dream can be an infinite wellspring of symbolic meaning, you know, especially if it's something, if you have a past life regression session that really kind of resonates with you, you can then integrate that in a way where you continually revisit it to mine more meaning and understanding from. I think my past life regression, the first one I ever had was with you just a few weeks ago. It was really fascinating because I always looked at past life regression as this kind of I didn't look at it as very credible. You know, so
again, a reasonable point of view, not one I reject or would even argue with.
Yeah. So like I heard a lot of stories about past life regression, and it always seemed to me that the people who were talking about their experiences with this, they were always like a prince or a queen or a knight, something grandiose in their past fantasy, life. Man. It's like, yeah, okay, that's exactly what I thought. But. And also there are just other kind of reasons why I thought, you can't revisit a past incarnation. It doesn't work like that. But that's before I thought about it symbolically. And then as I learned more and more about it, a lot from you, and then I attended your past life regression session, so you led us on to into a space, a safe and comfortable space, which manifested in my mind as the back porch of this little cabin that my family owns, that my grandfather built right along the Delaware River. It's just a very safe, intimate, very known, comfortable space.
I can feel it right now.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Went out onto the back porch, and I love when you are doing these sessions, you don't tell us what things look like. I've listened to your words and you use them very carefully. You go, if there was a door, what would it look like? You're not telling us what it is. You're enticing us to imagine for ourselves what that might be. And that door appeared to me as a big red door. And you're like, you feel the doorknob. What does the doorknob feel like? And you're really inducing the participant to have as heavy of a hand as possible in the construction of these things. It's almost like you're just leading us into that. So I opened this door, and behind the door was this big wheel of landscapes that was spinning kind of like a slot machine. And when I stepped through it, I got sucked into this like kind of green and brown mix, and then this kind of low resolution of greens and browns. And then all of a sudden it went from low resolution to high resolution. And I was standing frozen in a creek that was inside of this large valley, almost like a American West type prairie scene. And the rocks under the water were like kind of these smooth, polished rocks that I could feel on my feet underneath the 3 inches of crystal clear water. And it's almost like I just dropped into a body, but I was frozen, but I was able to look down, and I had the body of like a Australopithecus or something, like an early hominid, like a human ancestor. Because I looked more like a chimpanzee than I did a human. I didn't have the characteristic nakedness of a human. And I was frozen. But in that moment, I could feel that I had the intention of crossing the river to a small patch of woods that I knew some kind of other animal was living in. And I was dropped into this scene, and I couldn't move. And I was frozen, and I think that I was frozen because I wasn't as deep into the experience as I could have been. Sure. And I feel like any motion past that would be my imagination constructing it rather than my subconscious presenting it. So I froze, and then we kind of came out of that, and I'm like, oh, okay, that was interesting. I don't necessarily know how much I can mine out of that, but it was just, that was my first experience with past life regression. I was incarnated into like a human ancestor.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. So allow me to interpret.
Of course.
And I defer to you as the expert on your experience at all times, really. So you tell me what's incorrect or correct. And now everybody who's listening or watching is going to expect something like what you just described and be disappointed when you guys don't get that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, or you might get something better.
That's true.
Yeah.
So first of all, I love the moment of freezing, the listening to the freezing. It's kind of like you touched the wall, and you know, you found the boundary, and you said, "Oh, there it is," of what you were able to accept, get into, receive. You know, it doesn't really matter how we frame it, but just kind of like the boundary of the experience there at that time in that place. Of course, if we did one right now, we don't know what would happen. It would be different. So in everything that happened up until that point, pretty deliciously psychedelic stuff. How did it feel? Let me ask you that.
It felt cloudy in a way.
Interesting.
Where I was, there was resolution, high resolution to the experience that I was having in my mind's eye, but I feel like I didn't see things with as much clarity as I could have. And I think it was my lack of clarity my lack of immersion in that particular setting that made that feel that way. It's almost like a vignette type appearance.
Yeah, well said.
If that's more, that might be more of a visualization than a feeling.
Sure. It's beautifully said. It's also rather common for one's first experience that they have something like what you just described, where it is a bit vignette, it is a bit hazy, so to speak. The images at this point lack definition. There's senses of things like an early upright hominid, but you're not quite sure the construction of the body or the environment. And again, you're just kind of touching the physiology. Frozenness also. Just interesting in the context of yourself as an athlete and as a mover.
Yes.
And as someone deeply familiar with movement. And also
primal
intentional
movement,
stillness.
like parkour, particularly.
Yeah. So, and, freezing in the brain is an important thing. It's fight, flight, or freeze is that last one in parentheticals. And, your fight or flight response may have actually had nothing to do with it. It's just, again, frozenness indicates to us some kind of boundary, just kind of, again, broadly speaking. So for everybody listening, for yourself, I know that you're familiar with this to an extent, but it's the feeling, the states we go into that matter the most, of course, and coming to a performative, behavioral, practical, earthly, how's this going to help me at work on Tuesday? What am I going to do with this experience? If we can speak to that for a moment, because it is so important, of course, as we both know, to cut through the abstraction, as wonderful as that stuff can be to indulge in sometimes. And it is. I love it. I do it for a living. It's about those states, and how they connect for you. So if we were to do a one-on-one session, let's say, based on what you just spoke about or something else, during the session, I would ask you questions like, how would you like to feel? We might talk about specific goals, of course, that you have. If you're seeing me for a reason, my first question is always, how can I help you? But even if we were doing a general session, there would be different points where I would ask you, what's the lesson here? What's the resource? What's the reflection? Alan Watts, coming back to the mind is a mirror. I'm sure I'm paraphrasing. I'm not getting the exact wording correctly. But, the mind is a mirror. And to keep, see, I'm already messing it up. The mind is a mirror, and to accept the impression before it, but to not keep it. The way a mirror reflects what's in front of it, but changes, of course, and does not keep the reflection. And just as you say, during past life regression, the narratives, the characters, the landscapes, dreams too, perhaps all of life, we have this reflection. So pulling through the states, the awareness, of course, there usually is words and language around it, but something I say commonly, which is also, it's a hypnotic suggestion in a way that the gold, that we're looking for, the feeling is the gold beneath all the language that we could use to describe it. So
yeah, because we've been feeling a lot longer than we've been talking.
Yes, and I believe it's Maya Angelou now, the idea that, we'll forget everything we ever said and talked about, but we'll never forget how we felt about something, which is absolutely true physiologically, scientifically, neurologically. We hold on into the body, and now we're talking Bessel van der Kolk, and the body keeps the score, and the body as subconscious mind itself, and keeping the states and understanding the feelings. I'll never forget. I'll forget everything we talked about today, Tyler, but I'll remember your warmth and talking to you, and your feeling of being with you.
And that's kind of like the substrate to our internal life that we can access through past life regression.
Yes.
And hypnosis.
Yes, and perhaps meditation. Infinite roads to the same destinations in these cases. They're tools. They're tools that we have available to us, and there are many, many tools, as we know. So yeah, again, during past life regression, what we're looking for, what's the lesson here? What's the resource? What's the awareness that you're going to pull through? How is this going to help you in your work, in your relationships, in your life? And we always want to be making it as practical as possible.
Yeah. I think that I didn't approach our past life regression session as responsibly as I traditionally approach psychedelic sessions. I am
Interesting.
very good
Yeah.
about having an intention. And I think that I went into our that past life regression session without a clear intention. And I think that's why my experience was kind of like limited and kind of lost in the weeds. Or perhaps it might not have been that. Maybe there was something there for me to see exactly. But I think that maybe I should be more responsible next time to have a set intention, because that is so important with going into a psychedelic experience or any dream experience, really.
Yeah. I trust your intuition, so I would not argue with you about that. The other side of that coin is perhaps it was just right that you had no expectation of the exercise that first time around.
So I was open to whatever I needed to.
Whatever came through, man. And that wheel that you walked into is also such a beautiful visualization for the kind of overwhelming amount of options the brain will present us in past life regression. A lot of people do step through the door. I've had this experience in past life regression myself of stepping. It's the visualization's always some kind of portal that's going to indicate to the journeyman that they're going from one place to another. So it's a door, it's a bridge, it's a staircase, it's an elevator. There are many ways of doing it. But you go from one place to the other, and there's this sense of you see 7 different possibilities flash in your psyche at one time. And that's the lightning pace with which the brain can really process and offer information at work. To your point again, past life regression is a beautiful exercise for touching and understanding those boundaries between conscious mind and subconscious mind as we speak about it. There are many great metaphors for that too. Imagine a baseball game. The commentator's box is the conscious mind that's going, oh, that play was messed up, and here's this person, this is great, and that's not good enough, and everything else, and has all the opinions. And then the subconscious mind is the game itself.
Wow, that's a great metaphor. Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit and maybe just entertain some of my thoughts on the parapsychology of past life regression. One of the things that makes me very critical of the idea that we are actually tapping into past lives that have historically and chronologically happened in the past incarnations is how unlikely would it be to be incarnated as the same species on the same planet twice? Like, okay, even if life only exists on our Earth, think about all the different species, all the different life forms. What are the chances? Like, there's this, I heard this Buddhist talk about the chance of being incarnated as a human can be conceptualized as a tube, an inner tube, floating on top of an ocean, and a turtle living at the bottom of the ocean that only pokes its head up once every 100 years. The chance of being incarnated as a human, the chance of being incarnated as a human is the chance of that turtle coming up to the surface and popping its head through that single hoop floating on the top of the ocean. And that's just,
I guess we're lucky to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. I had an experience with salvia back when it was legal, back when you could go down to St. Mark's Square and buy some. And I had one of my few reincarnation experiences on a psychedelic. I smoked this salvia and I essentially died in a way that was different than ayahuasca. I thought, oh, Tyler, you've done it now, because I felt like all of who I am just drift away from me, and I had the common salvia experience of being sucked through like kind of this paper towel roll like tunnel, and then I was in this kind of, again, this foggy greenish landscape, and it came into higher resolution, and I felt this kind of oceanic oneness with everything around me. And then what started to appear were these translucent green cubes, this vista of translucent green cubes on all sides of me. And then I started to see little tiny objects inside of each one of these green cubes. And I realized that I had been reincarnated as a plant cell. And no one would ever think that you can be reincarnated as a plant cell. How come people don't have past life regression experiences where, oh, I was a plant cell in a past life, or I was a slug, I was a cockroach that got stepped on?
Now, I guarantee you, if enough people hear and see this conversation, somebody in the comments
is going to say, I
was a plant cell, bro. I went to this conference in Denmark in 2011 and worked with this so-and-so, and I was a plant cell.
Yeah.
I completely hear you. And I love the line of questioning. By the way, was the salvia experience productive? Was it positive in the end?
So Terence McKenna said that you can tell how productive a psychedelic experience was by how ready you are to do it again afterwards, and I haven't done it since. It was one of those things where, it allowed me to have my own unique relationship with the idea of reincarnation, and my own kind of frame of reference and understanding of that. Yeah. Was it productive? I think in the way that it stretched my imagination around the idea of reincarnation, it was productive.
Great.
Yeah.
That counts.
Yeah.
That counts.
Yeah.
So psychedelic experience is certainly kindred, at least in terms of, to your point, the integration process, the way our psychology will communicate back to itself and reflect and project. Of course, again, as we mentioned before, many roads to the same destinations, and all of them being tools. I do suggest to anybody that regards psychedelics as shortcuts to check in with that mindset, in the spirit of deep work. I don't think it's really healthy or good for us to think of things in terms of shortcuts. Keeping in mind it's a marathon, not a race.
Yeah.
With that understanding, these tools, as we know, are incredibly powerful. And again, coming back to how one informs the other, my psychedelic experiences have deepened my past life regressions, which deepens my meditation, which deepens my understanding of myself, which deepens my psychology when I'm talking to my friends and my listening, when I'm with my clients, also with my friends, my family, of course. So yeah, everything in measure.
So that kind of leads us to another interesting topic. So Sigmund Freud was famous for utilizing coca leaves in use while he was hypnotizing people, and also just during talk therapy. I've heard certain things about kava being used and kratom. Do you know anything about any kind of psychedelic or psychoactive plants being used in conjunction with hypnotherapy?
Oh, yes. Yes. But there does need to be a nuanced understanding first of things like set and setting. And that when we introduce, let's say, psilocybin and mushrooms to a hypnosis experience or a past life regression, or if we introduce past life regression to a mushroom tea ceremony, it's not one plus the other. It's one times the other.
Yeah.
And
that's a good point.
They expand upon one another exponentially. And it's, again, with appreciation, having been young myself and having benefited greatly from a lot of my own experimentation, but having addiction in my family and having a sensitivity to hopefully all, but as many as I can, sides of the conversations around these things. These, again, tools. A cavalier attitude is another thing I suggest against.
Yeah.
coming back to marathon, not a race, coming back to the importance of integration, the importance of set and setting, and also, too, the importance of experimentation. The last thing I want to do is take the fun out of these things. And there are so many brave psychiatrists, doctors, friends of mine, and work associates that I know that are experimenting with all sorts of things: ketamine, psilocybin, ayahuasca, mushrooms and LSD in various forms, cannabis, of course, in all of the spectrum of applications for cannabis. And a lot of them don't feel a freedom to speak about it, which is a bummer to me, of course. And it makes me completely respecting their boundaries, of course, and understanding their positions. It makes me think of what we're missing in the conversation, and just how limited, again, the vocabulary is around these things. So sorry,
it seems like such a cool new territory, though, the intersection between hypnosis, or particularly past life regression, and something like psilocybin ceremony.
Certainly.
Or ayahuasca ceremony.
Yes. I was talking with a friend of mine about this recently, and we are working with a program around this of sorts. But if you can imagine, in a triangle of three subjects kind of working at the core of the experience, it would be psilocybin and mushrooms, past life regression, and then Joseph Campbell's work around the hero's journey. And the hero's journey as a developmental process in the psyche of a human being, not so much a male or female hero, not necessarily Luke Skywalker in this case.
Yeah, of course.
But, we can also include Luke. But yeah, forming an experience and a program around that, around the collection of these ideas that could work with an individual or a group over the right amount of time. You mentioned before this, the idea that, this is this new age of experimentation. And I do agree with that. There are actually, it's quite clear there are many new frontiers being explored and combined and worked with together. But I would say, too, and this, I'm trying to remember where exactly I read this recently. It was somebody else's words who influenced me in this understanding. But this should have happened in the 1950s or 60s. And what was missing was a proper integration. And the problematic side of, I don't want to even name anybody, just the problematic side of the story.
Timothy Leary.
Yeah, man. The problematic side of the characters at the heart of the story, which is something common to hypnosis, too. I mean, there's so many fucking problematic characters. Pardon me for swearing on your podcast. I don't know if we
totally
can do this. Yeah, man. A bunch of dirty shitheads who ruin it for everybody else, And again, that idea alone is deep within the history of hypnosis.
Well, I hope you get the opportunity to chart that territory a little bit.
Thank you, brother. I'm trying. It it occurs to me, and I saw this in my dad's lifetime. There was when I was a kid, so much rich work around the science and research into hypnosis already that exists. I really think the culture is where the frontier is. It's where the battleground is, so to speak. Needing more just good representations and information in the culture.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit to one of my final questions for you. So I've always been kind of poignantly aware of how consumer culture and advertising is trying to hypnotize us, to put us into trance states through media. And I've always tried my best to not succumb to the hypnosis that entices me to make those 5 easy payments of $29.99 for a metal detector that I don't actually need. Or like now it's hitting us all the time through social media, constantly telling us to buy things, or rather that we're not good enough until we have a particular thing.
You're all right, but you'd be better if you had this thing.
Exactly. Your life is all in black and white before you have it. And now that you're holding it, it's color again. How do we kind of buttress ourselves and immunize ourselves against the hypnotism of the marketplace, of consumer culture?
Man, that's a great, I love it, dude. Let's do the whole thing again just on that subject.
Yeah.
So first off, education is inoculation. So educating ourselves foremost. I have this friend I think of often, Anthony, who said to me once when we were talking about all of this stuff, and I don't remember exactly how he said it, but it was something to the effect of, do you think it's possible we just fundamentally misunderstand ourselves? And I think the answer had to be definitely. There is, coming back to your questioning of past life regression and some of the ideas around reincarnation, I think the idea, imagine future incarnations of ourselves meeting 500 years from now, we'll say, getting together and doing some future version of a podcast where we talk about past life regressions we did, where we both remember Dan and Tyler, and that it's so easy to, I don't want to say it's easy, but when you zoom out it and look at it a certain way, the idea that Dan's past lives are the ones that are important to begin with is a egocentric, Western capitalistic, individuated kind of point of view. I don't know if individuated is a word.
It is.
I'm going to go with it. Great. So, and it's through this lens that, again, it just tracks with every other message in the marketplace of I am important, I am unique, this story is about me, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a nice way of creating a clean, what feels like a linear timeline, of course, time and ourselves being nonlinear. But when it gets linear, it does generally make us feel comfortable, I notice, temporarily, if only. So all this is a way of coming back to, in the marketplace, education is inoculation and understanding foremost. In the individual, it might just be emotional intelligence, right? To understand how much one needs, how much one doesn't. I can't and would not balance anybody else's checkbook, but the money of it, we delete or forget that part at our own peril. Money is not talked enough in our society. At least it's not talked enough in the right way. I think, for instance, the idea that discussing money in a certain way is crass or crude is also a means of keeping us stupid and uninformed. And that, of course, we need to talk about money, and of course we need to talk about the value of things, especially in a city like New York, which itself is a monument to capitalism itself, that I love. I love New York. It's my home. And I thrive in a capitalist system also, so I don't want to sound like I'm vilifying anything or anyone.
There's a way, I feel like, of doing capitalism properly. Like you hear presidential candidates like Andrew Yang talk about human capitalism.
Indeed, yeah.
And
universal basic income, UBI, is a very important concept.
But it seems like there's still this legacy coming from particularly a guy named Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And he really injected hypnosis and hypnotic techniques, pandering to certain subconscious desires, repressed desires, and influencing culture through these hypnotic means in order to make profit for certain companies. So capitalism is fine until you start kind of doing this dark magic on the people that is not it's not creating value in their lives. It's extracting value from their lives using dark magic, I think, is the best word to
I love that terminology. I agree. I think, in broad, abstract kinds of playful terms, absolutely. Advertising, marketing, and PR are totally dark magic in our real world. And I know a lot of really talented dark magicians who I count amongst my friends, and I like them. I don't want them to go anywhere. I think we're all in this together. So I really think it's important to not necessarily cast or project blame around so much as just understand what it is we're working with. Edward Bernays.
Look him up.
Yeah, when we're done talking,
Yeah.
Century of the Self is a documentary series by Adam Curtis. Check out the first episode, which goes deep on this, which is an incredible series.
I actually
in itself.
watched that in preparation for this
Did
podcast.
You?
Yeah.
Oh man, I take that as a compliment. I do, because
that's a great. The Century of the Self is a great. I believe it's a 3-part.
Four-part
documentary series.
Yeah.
I watched the first episode. Yeah. I've seen all 4 years ago, but go ahead. Edward Bernays.
Yeah. Well, he, to your point, is a very, very important figure in this story, perhaps a central, if not the central figure, where he takes his uncle, Sigmund Freud's ideas about the mind, the psyche, psychology, desire, sex, death, etc., fear, and literally seeing what had just occurred years beforehand in Nazi Germany and during the war, asked, well, if you could rile up an entire nation's people into that kind of mania and craziness, could you do it through the market? Mm-hmm. Could you do it through just selling things? And could you do it through an economy instead of a war machine? And had direct... He had all the phone numbers of all the major executives and all of the advertising agencies here in New York City, mere blocks away from where we're sitting at this moment. Mm-hmm. And they went to work, and he really did funnel all of these ideas very practically. One of the famous examples, I can't remember the specifics, so again, please look it up, but it was a march. It was about marketing cigarettes to women, and it was one of the very first, it's in the documentary, and it's one of the very first, also kind of very oversimplified, but perhaps true at our primal, core, the idea of the cigarette as a phallic symbol and a symbol of power, and these ideas, and basically just put a bunch of women smiling and marching
because
proudly.
There used to be a taboo against women smoking,
yes.
And Edward Bernays was employed by the tobacco industry to get women smoking again.
Thank you.
So he kind of pandered to the bubbling up feminism ideologies that existed back then, and he's like, women, you will be empowered if you smoke tobacco. He made it an empowerment thing, a power thing.
Another important thing that he understood, and that did, again, give him so much power and the marketing machine so much power, which it still enjoys, is that it is an experiment. I don't think, and of course I don't know, perhaps he's written about it, perhaps not, but I don't think that Edward Bernays could have predicted what the outcome of the marketing stunt was or would have been. What he was more interested in and what he knew was that to have market share and attention. You see, this is also why for companies, huge corporations, huge movies that come out, half of the budget is for marketing. Half, is because visibility is mind share. And think of how many different advertising fronts we cannot unsee here in the city, and how many different places that there's just so much visual noise at any given moment.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and our brain can only take so much. It's a small container.
Yeah, and I think it's important to just kind of have a certain type of hypnotic immune system, so to speak, a psychic immune system against this dark magic, against this dark hypnosis.
Yeah, and again, I would say education, again, inoculation, the way of the best defense that we can have in our lives is to understand what we're seeing, and why, again, I think casting villains and blame and things like that will ultimately reflect back on us poorly, but to have a kind of objective neutrality, at least as much as we can in observing it.
Yeah.
And again, when I say that, I don't want to sound too passive. There are points that are too much. I mean, frankly, if it were my choice, what we would live with there would be less advertising space.
Yeah.
But yeah. This is the
so
world we live in.
One last question that
Please.
I want to ask for a friend who is very much interested in in his past lives, his past incarnations.
Yeah.
He believes that in the past he was an artist, and he has identified the artist that who he was, and he wants to own a painting by the artist that he was in his past life, because there's a certain power to owning the same object in multiple incarnations. Can you speak to that at all? The power of owning some kind of amulet or object that you have owned in a past life?
Well, that is a very, very witchy idea to begin with. The power, to speak very simply about it, the power of the object, the item, the narrative is in the hands, the heart, and the eyes of the holder. As a hypnotist, I am deeply tuned into and interested in superstitious thought and superstitious thinking, which there is a ton of course, around the subjects that I work in. And the way people talk about magic, the way people talk about objects, the stories that we create around all of the objects that we surround ourselves with, again, projections and reflections.
Yeah.
So as I say that, if this object is as powerful as it sounds it is to that person, then that's what it is. What I would say to that person or anybody else is, the story might be as precious as the object. This is an idea I got from Bob Dylan. If you share something too precious too early, the world will just shit on it and destroy it. So choosing who we talk to and how we talk about what's important to us, and I suggest that to everybody actually with past life regression, and the clients that I have some of the deepest, most important relationships with to me, I will always be very careful about how I tell their stories, because I don't really think of them as belonging to me. I most certainly share them with the people that I work with. And besides that, the progress that they make can be compromised by the way I speak about it if I'm not careful, especially if I speak publicly, but also if I speak privately. So there's something sacred there. There's something truly sacred that, again, it's a boundary that
it might have to incubate for a little bit.
Yes, it develop and grow stronger, and perhaps it's just a boundary in and of itself, kind of like the basic confidentiality that physicians or therapists or hypnotists have with the people that they work with. So to come back to your friend's story, it sounds like a very, very powerful object. And for all of us, I just suggest giving ourselves the gift of being able to zoom out as far as we can to understand it's also just an object, and to see how we are interacting with it, and just to make that relationship as productive and potent as it can be. And it sounds like in this case, it is that.
Yeah. All right. Well, Daniel Ryan, thank you so much for doing
this.
Thank you
very much,
that was
Tyler.
a fun talk.
Appreciate it. Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. How can people find you? What are you working on right now that people can keep up on?
So I'm finishing my first book called Meditation, Hypnosis, and Past Life Regression, which explores this metaphor of the glass of water, the swimming pool, and the ocean. And that will be coming out sometime next year, I'm hoping, early next year. And then I'm here in the office on 29th Street at the Center for Integrative Hypnosis. I also have offices in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. My website is danielryancrt.com, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook too, although I try not to look at Facebook too much anymore.
Cool. You don't want to get hypnotized by the marketplace.
That's correct. That's correct, yeah. And it does do that.
Yeah. Awesome. Daniel, thank you for lifting the iceberg, getting lifted.
Cheers,
with
man.
us.
Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah,
I appreciate
thank you.
it. Good to see you today.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye now.